I got doxxed yesterday because I used to own a Tesla. My name, address, phone numbers on some fucking website that I actually posted this morning on LinkedIn and said, you know, whether you're a current or former Tesla owner, they all think any Tesla owner or former owner must be a right-winger.
Why does a crackhead never have enough time? Well, because they always want to be getting high, right? And the way that we're teaching our kids to get high is through this constant dopamine cycling of interacting with media. They're deprived, whether intentionally or unintentionally, of real human interaction. Google had so much dominance in the ad market that it no longer had to worry about what you wanted.
Yeah.
It worried about what it wanted. And what Google wanted was to continue charging more and more and more for ads.
The people that are railing against the Doge thing going on today. I mean, how are you against, fraud and abuse? How are you against, creating greater efficiencies? How are you against that? My mom actually sang on the radio in New York when she was a young girl. And my dad, he taught me how to play guitar and ukulele, and he's Hawaiian, so music was just a big part of the culture. And so growing up, my home was just filled with music all the time, and it was really pretty cool.
Nice.
So music is just it's part of my upbringing, it's part of my makeup. Yeah.
It's something I always would have liked to have been better at.
Yeah.
But, the only thing that we have is time and attention. And it's like paying attention to one thing, getting better at one thing means neglecting something else.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, how do you set your priorities?
Yeah, I think if you grow up with it, though, it becomes part of you. And so, playing a musical instrument is just something you always did. It's kind of like riding a bike, right? It's like something I always did. So I don't have to, make time to do it. It just falls naturally into, hey, pull out a guitar and play a song.
Sure.
Okay, well, I can play a song. And yet, if you really wanted to be good at it, like you say, you'd have to devote a lot more time to it. But when it's just something that you kind of grow up with, it's just...
See, I tried to learn to play guitar several times, and I just could never get there. But I'm like an expert typist, right? I type really fast. And so I got a keyboard, and I got pretty good at playing the keyboard. But then I started my own company, and I didn't put time into it. And one of my friends from high school had a daughter that wanted to play keyboard, so I just gave it to her.
So there you were, giving it away.
Yeah, exactly. Story of my life, just giving it away.
That's like the first computer chess game somebody gave me. It was actually a device, right? And the pieces sat on there, and then you would push a button, and it would tell you where to move the opposing piece, and then you'd have to come up with your move, and then you have to punch that in, and then the computer would think about it and tell you what to do on their side next. And I remember playing it incessantly. I mean, I didn't stop for 2 days until I beat the expert level, and then I gave it away and never played again. It's like, no, I'm going to quit while I'm on top. And actually, I when I got to college, I started playing more. But yeah, I actually had that device somebody gave me, and I was thrilled with it. I mean, it was just amazing. But
have you ever seen that old Radio Shack ad that's 100+ different devices you can buy at Radio Shack?
No.
And so somebody took it and captioned it and said, these are all on your phone now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And a few Thanksgivings ago, I was just watching my niece play on her tablet, and she turns to me and she says, what games did you play on your tablet when you were a kid? And I go,
Really?
Oh, yeah, honey, we didn't have tablets.
Tablets?
She goes, you had to play them on your phone? So I explained to her, well, the phone was a thing that you just plug into the wall.
Yeah.
And she thinks about what I said, and she goes, so you're telling me you just would call a place and ask if someone was there?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's literally how it worked, but she wouldn't believe me.
Really?
And all these devices, like the chessboard and they're used to, what was that? That thing with the sounds and the colors, and you had
Simon.
Simon,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And these silly little games from I think it was called Tiger, where it was one game. Electronics used to be different devices, and now it's all just in your phone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's even now you can download the legacy Nintendo apps onto the Switch,
Right.
and play them like, and my son-in-law, who's just turned 40, and his kids, my grandkids, that's all they play is like the old-timey, Mario and Mario Kart and things like that. They don't want to play necessarily the newer versions.
Right.
They want to play the old sort of timey stuff. And I think it's so cool because it's kind of like you get in a car with a young person. Even I was just down in South America, and the guides were driving us to the next place we were going to hike. And these guys are young, and they're late 20s, maybe mid-20s, and they're listening to disco music. And I'm like, what are you guys listening to? I mean, you got Gloria Gaynor and all this stuff on there, the Bee Gees, and I'm like, why? I said, and it was all the obscure. It just had the disco beat, and you could tell from the song that it was a particular artist that you knew of, but it wasn't like their biggest hits. It was like somebody sold them the B side of every record that existed during the disco era. And I just thought it phenomenal that these 20-year-olds were listening to music that was popular back in the 80s. I mean, it was crazy.
Everything old is new again,
Isn't
right?
it?
And we go in these cycles, 20 years, 30 years.
I wish that was true of me.
Yeah, right? Well, if you make it long enough, I'm sure we can build you a new body.
Yeah, I know.
But
I'll be wearing bell bottoms and pleated skirts.
well, they do. Or like, bell bottoms are actually popular again. So are those Jinkos, if you know what those are from the 90s.
No, I don't, but it's
Well,
okay.
So I live right by Westport, right between Westport and the plaza. And so I decided, COVID was kind of over, and I realized I hadn't socialized in years. And even when I did socialize, it was people I knew. It was like for business networking, and I was like, I've got to just be purely social, right? Not purpose-driven. And so I decided to go out to Westport every weekend and just like talk to people. Relearn how to talk to strangers, right? We used to do that when we were young. Everybody was a stranger back then.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and so I go into this live music bar, and I just start talking to this young lady, and after a while, she's kind of like, beat it, old man, this place is for the kids. And I'm like, do you hear the music they're playing? Because it was all like late 90s, early 2000s. And she's like, so what? It's popular. And I'm like, this is my music.
Yeah.
You can't play my music and tell me I'm not welcome.
Right. Yeah. My music's welcome, so am I.
Exactly.
Right? So you said something earlier about playing a musical instrument and having to make choices between your life as an entrepreneur and playing a musical instrument and devoting time to things. So I'm really interested in how, what happened to you? What trauma?
I ask that question a lot.
What trauma did you experience as a young kid that said, you know what, I'm going to go start my own company? How did that ever enter your mind? I'm really interested in what was the genesis of, hey, I'm going to go start a company.
Yeah. Well, gosh, how do I say this? I think a lot of it was a motivation towards independence that I didn't see in my own parents. Okay, so like, my parents married young. They had a bunch of kids. They didn't have education beyond high school. They didn't have economic opportunities. And I remember when I was real young, the day after Christmas, my dad had to go back to work. Like, he always had to work just to provide for us. And I remember thinking, like, why would you let someone tell you that you have to work on this day or take you away from your family? And I was too young to understand that, like, he had obligations that he couldn't avoid. But I would say that was probably the seed of it, was wanting to have more control over my own life. Now, as I got older, I realized that being an entrepreneur did not mean that I had more control over my life. I might have more choices, or at least different choices. But I think that's probably where it started, was just watching my dad be a company man my entire childhood.
What about your mom? Did she work outside the house?
Occasionally. Okay. Mostly it was more hobby-driven, interest-driven. Stay-at-home mom, she had 5 kids to raise, so there wasn't a lot of time. But then once we got older and we could take care of ourselves, we were all in like junior high and high school, then her time and options opened up a lot.
So when you were, let's talk about like high school. I think that's a period of time when, you as a emerging adult begin to develop your own sort of values, right? What did you really value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like early on you came to the conclusion that valuing your independence
Mm-hmm.
or your notion of what independence looked like was important.
Yeah, I would say so. And like, I knew that to be independent, I needed to make money. That's just, it's what drives the world these days. But at the same time, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And so that was actually the first company that I started. My dad was always into computers. And so we got a CD burner before anybody else had them. I was online from the time I was a little kid. And now it seems like everybody online is a little kid, but like it was unusual back in the 80s. Well, so dad brought home the CD burner and stack of CDs, and he showed me how to use it. And I was hanging out with some friends, and I was reading a copy of Rolling Stone, and I saw the Billboard 100 at the back. And I knew that I could download all those songs off the internet. And so I went home and I made a spreadsheet that was the Billboard Hot 100. I downloaded all of them that I could find, MP3s, way back when.
This is like Napster kind of stuff?
This was before Napster.
BitTorrent?
Yes, this was Usenet, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and
I
so
remember some of those things.
right, it's been ages, hard to believe. But so I brought this checklist to school the next day, and I told everybody $1 for the CD, $1 for every song, and after the first CD is full, new CDs are free.
So you were Apple Computer. Or
Yeah, basically.
You were 99 cents for a song.
I just handed out these checklists, and people would just go through and check what they wanted, and I brought home a lot of money and a stack of order forms. And so I'm sitting there in the living room just burning all these CDs, and my mom comes in, and she sees the money in the order forms, and she's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm making money. This is my new company. And so she made me give back all the money, throw away the order forms, because she swore that I was going to get sued. And people did get sued for that later, but it wasn't me.
It wasn't you, but in theory, what you were doing was illegal.
In theory, a lot of things that we do are illegal,
Well,
like,
not like violently criminal illegal.
Yeah,
But there was
right.
a civil case to be made that these are copyrighted products and you're profiting from somebody else's copyrighted material,
absolutely,
right?
just like
So
AI
the whole
companies
digital
are doing
rights
now.
movement, right? Kind of, I mean, the reason because back then,
Mm-hmm.
so I was trying to start a business around the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
legitimately, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and it was called NanoFi.
Mm-hmm.
So these were micropayments. So back prior to the iTunes, we used Napster and BitTorrent and all these other things to basically steal music.
Sure.
Right? And like you did with your list, you can make a whole pile of these songs you could basically copy. And but the problem wasn't the availability of the music. It was a payment system that was small enough in increments
Right.
that the credit card companies would be willing to give you a discount on those transactions, because otherwise, if you're paying 25 cents a transaction to run a credit card for $1, you just lost 25% of your revenue to a credit card fee. There had to be a way to get that down to 2 or 3 cents, right, per transaction, or a percentage that was much smaller. It should have been, like 500 bips or something like that. It shouldn't even been a whole, percentage. But there was no solution for that. So this NanoFi company that I wanted to start was about nano payments, or because there were micropayments before, but what's next? It's nano payment, right?
Of course.
Micropayments are the things you're paying for the gas station where you spend $10 on gas. That was a micropayment, because even they had a sweetheart deal with the credit card companies, because they knew the transaction fees were too high relative to the average invoice or the average amount that was being charged. Well, imagine at $1 a piece, if you're paying those kind of rates. So that was the whole initiative, was to take what you were doing and actually attach a legitimate payment model to it that the credit card companies could get behind.
And when was this?
I would say late 90s.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were in good company, because the late 90s, the original dot-com boom, is when the seeds of crypto were firmly planted, right? And there were a lot of companies at the time, in relative terms, doing, what they called, e-gold. Everything was E at the time. Nobody does E anymore, but different concepts for coins and gold and so on. And it wasn't until 2011 or whenever, when Bitcoin was launched, that it really started to catch on.
Yeah.
But like any technical revolution, it started years before, decades before, and there were a lot of misfires and failed attempts before it actually happened.
Yeah. Well, I think in some respects, what we did back in the 90s with this NanoFi business idea was something that the industry needed for a lot of things. And still does. But Steve Jobs broke the code on that by going to the credit card companies and saying, I'm going to guarantee you X amount of volume if you'll give me these rates. And they held him to it, and he delivered in spades. I mean, he did fantastic with it. But it would have taken somebody with their brand clout, I think, to have made the actual transfer of the music and the process of transferring it, the user experience, as good as Apple made it. If all I was doing in the background was enabling the micro payments or the nano payments, then that would have been fine for me. I would have been happy with that. But of course, what Apple typically does is they disintermediate things and they go direct. Right. I don't need Don to do that. I don't need NanoFi to do this. I can do this myself. And that bars everybody else. It makes everybody else step up to the same level.
Right.
And so, it's kind of like, Bank of America having their own payment transfer system, and then everybody else has to go build theirs. Or they have to go buy PayPal, or they have to go buy somebody else.
Look, I would argue that the need for effective micropayments or nano payments, or however you want to phrase it, still exists, and in a more pressing way than ever before.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, one of the workarounds for the lack of an effective way to pay somebody small amounts has been the emergence of advertising. Okay? So, what made Google Google? It was the realization that they could sell ads into search based on what people were searching for, and that they could place ads on web pages based on the reason that the person was on the web page. Okay? And this was Web 1. It was advertising and e-commerce with Google and Amazon. Well, my argument is the reason that advertising became the medium that all of these internet platforms emerged from, the earth that the internet was built on, was because it consolidated payments into more manageable sizes.
Yeah.
Instead of having to charge someone 10 cents to load a website or 5 cents to listen to a song, you collect a big chunk of money from an advertiser and then you break it up against
It's basically
the
a
sites.
sponsorship.
Yeah, sponsorship.
Right. It's kinda like I'm sponsoring this TV series. You don't have to pay for each episode because you're going to sit and listen to my commercial or watch my commercial, right?
Exactly.
Same kind of thing.
And I mean, the obstacle to effective small payments continues today. It's the reason that television was ad-based. It's the reason that radio is ad-based. It's the reason that Spotify and music platforms and YouTube and essentially everything is ad-based. And what I'm really eager to see is the emergence of a digital transaction system that enables person-to-person or person-to-business payments with a cost basis low enough that people can actually pay for directly what they want and need without an intermediary that is intermediating what they're allowed to see or what they're willing to pay for.
Well, I think that's kind of the streaming model for most media today. However, Hulu and some of the others, they make it now you cannot buy a tier of service minus ads. You're going to watch ads, period. And so it's become just like broadcast TV. I think for the advertiser, it's diminished the value of each ad because they're not targeting the audience the way that, well, they could have if they'd asked me, look, Don, what interests do you have? If you're willing to listen to ads on these various topics that interest you, then instead of paying $9 a month, you pay $5.99 a month. Okay, I might do that, right? I could put up with a few commercials, or there'll never be more than 30 seconds of commercial between whatever you're watching, when they go to a break. Well, there's sometimes on Hulu and others, you're sitting there for 2.5 minutes watching ads.
Yes.
That are irrelevant to you.
Right.
So it's 2.5 minutes. I get to get up, go get a sandwich, get some chips, and come back, and I haven't watched the thing.
So I have an inverse reaction to advertising. And what I mean is, when I see an ad for something, I'm less likely to buy it. Okay? And what I really find motivating is this means of disintermediating commerce so that people can buy directly from each other, so that I don't have to deal with ads. Now, I want to know about things that would interest me that I don't know about, but I don't want it shoved in my face. And, when Netflix announced advertising in their plans, I canceled my plan, but I bought shares.
Yeah.
And then I made twice my money, said good enough, sold it off.
Straddled it, yeah.
Yeah. But the point is, I actively avoid systems that impose advertising on me, because the only thing that I have is time, and the way that I spend time is attention, and advertising demands my attention. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't directly compensate me. It compensates me indirectly through paying for something on my behalf. But I'm too independent. I don't want people to pay for things on my behalf. I want to make that active choice.
Right. Well, I think the promise of streaming was that if you wanted to hear or see ads that were relevant to you, you could.
Mm-hmm.
George Gilder wrote a book, I forget now, I think Life After Television it was called, which would be the streaming media, post-broadcast TV period. And yet the broadcasters, it's like they're just one-trick ponies. They only know how to do one thing.
What they're used to.
Go back to broadcast advertising, as if the audience is everybody. Again, I'm sitting there watching, ads for tampons, and I could care less, right? So I'm walking away, right? Why am I watching this? 90% of them are drug ads, because the drug industry seems hell-bent on spending as much money as they can. I guess to promote the drugs that only doctors can prescribe.
They've got a captive audience.
And I know I saw a headline this morning about RFK Jr. wants to eliminate drug advertising, and are you in favor or aren't you? It was a survey, and I didn't answer because I'm thinking, well, am I not? I don't know. I kind of don't care. But again, if there were better ads that were more relevant to me, I'd rather watch that than 6 ads in a row on Keytruda.
Right.
I don't need to see the same ad over and over again.
So to that point, Don, Google originally grew up on the promise that they would serve an ad that was relevant to you, that you cared about, and that's why you would tolerate it and the advertiser would pay for it.
Yeah.
But success has a tendency to seed the roots of failure. Are you familiar with this term, enshittification?
No.
Okay.
Enshittification.
More politely, it's called platform decay.
Okay.
And the idea of enshittification or platform decay is that once you have enough of the market, you don't have to compete.
Yeah.
Your success provides an inertia and a momentum to where you make your choices and you don't have to respond to the market anymore. So there was a point where Google had so much dominance in the ad market that it no longer had to worry about what you wanted.
Yeah.
It worried about what it wanted. And what Google wanted was to continue charging more and more and more for ads. So it started selling ads to people based on who was going to pay the most to get in front of you, as opposed to what ad was most likely to be appealing to you.
Okay.
And
so what was the word again?
Enshittification.
Enshittification.
Yeah, I think it was Cory Doctorow that coined it. He's
Really?
coined a lot of internet terms over the years.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds similar to Schumpeter's creative destruction. Everything that is successful at some point will collapse under its own weight.
Yes.
And, I've grown up in the tech industry since, I joined AMD in 1980, and I was in the industry for 2 years before that. And I've seen companies like Tandem Computer and Digital Equipment Corporation and Wang and even Compaq Computer just disappear from the landscape, right? And these were household names back in the 90s and early 2000s, Siemens Nixdorf and, And so we don't have things that last forever.
Right.
I remember in my first company, our prime competitor was Silicon Graphics, and they owned the movie, TV, special effects industry. And yet there was a lot of special effects that weren't getting done, especially on the television side, because the Silicon Graphics solution was so damn expensive and so time consuming. And so when we started shipping our product, that was a fraction of the cost of the Silicon Graphics product and was just as fast, if not in some cases faster. Our uptake was amazing on the TV side of things. And one of our first customers was the TV show Sequest, which was a Steven Spielberg.
Sequest DSV?
Yeah.
I watched that.
And before we got there, they could produce maybe a minute to a minute and a half of new CGI for every weekly episode. And after that, it was almost as much as you want.
Right.
And they didn't have to keep reusing the same, clips of whatever CGI they had to get 3 or 4 minutes of CGI into every episode. And the same was true with Battlestar Galactica and,
right.
some of the stuff.
Babylon 5.
Babylon 5. All of those were our customers, pretty quickly. And yet Silicon Graphics today is a footnote in history.
Right.
Where'd they go? What happened to them?
Lucasfilm, Pixar, and just the mass adoption. You see, Don, this is the way that human history works, is a pendulum that swings from one side to the other, and it just keeps swinging.
Yeah.
And when you get to one edge, it kind of hangs there a moment, and you feel like it's always going to be there, but it doesn't. It just goes back again.
Yeah.
This, you remind me of The Innovator's Dilemma, and I want to say the guy's name is Clayton Christensen with
Clayton
Harvard
Christensen.
Business Review. And one of the points that he makes is that one of the reasons that you have platform decay, that you have, what was the other term?
Creative destruction.
Creative destruction, is that when an industry really becomes entrenched, the only way for them to really innovate is to compete against their own core offering.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be the snake that eats its own tail and compete with a new product that's risky against what they already have that they're making money off of.
Yeah, the years I spent in Silicon Valley, the watch phrase was, if you don't eat your own lunch, somebody will.
Right.
So get to it. You have to be willing to, eat your own in order to replace it with something that's, substantially better. And you can't do that if you are circling the wagon, so to speak,
right,
and trying to defend your turf with the old shit that you have.
Right.
If you're not willing to go reinvent yourself, somebody's going to reinvent it for you.
Absolutely.
And then you're going to find yourself on the outside looking in. Or that wagon train that you've circled is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until finally it doesn't exist anymore. And that's what happened to Tandem Computer. It's what happened to Cray Research. It happened to Compact Computer. It happened to everybody. They get complacent in their place in the industry, and when they're threatened, they don't reinvent themselves. They circle the wagons.
Right.
Compact Computer fired Rod Canyon, who was the founder of the company, because he wanted to partner with Silicon Graphics and produce a much higher performance desktop computer, where the board had a problem with that is, no, we're already in the commodity laptop PC business. Why would we want to be in the high-end business?
Right.
And Rod's like, so we can cover the waterfront. And they're like, no, we got to stick with our knitting. And that low-cost market that they then pursued at the cost of everything else led them to their decline.
Yeah.
And they finally just got absorbed by HP, and now Compaq is yet, like Silicon Graphics, another footnote in history.
Well, and now HP is almost a footnote.
Almost a footnote in history.
They have just neglected their own client base and continued
Well, if it wasn't for
so
printers,
much.
they would be.
Well, and printers is one of the core of their problem now. You know the whole ink thing. We don't have to get into it. But, well, that's one of the things that I'm really fascinated by right now with the rise of AI. And, Google dominated search and ads and revenue from ads, and that's where they made themselves. And now Google only does like a fraction of searches, because searches go through AI, and this has been a swing of the pendulum, a darn near overnight change in the last 5 years, the dominance of AI-driven search. And what I think is fascinating about this is that when when Google responds to your search with an AI overview, you don't need to click through to that page.
Right.
And so I was talking recently to someone that lost 85% of their traffic because their content was so good that it became the AI overview for every keyword, and now nobody goes to their page. 85% of their traffic is 85% of their ad revenue, 85% of their subscription revenue, their affiliate marketing, where if you buy something, they get some money for it. And like Google is actively preempting and undermining its primary source of revenue, advertising on pages, by giving you the AI overview.
And I don't quite understand that because honestly, and maybe it's because I'm older, when I go to search on something, it's because I want a quantity of results that I can discern or read for myself as to whether or not it's relevant to what I really was asking or wanted to ask, right? But, we're lazy, so I don't write the whole thing out. I write down a few of the key words or a key phrase, and then I kind of, sort of sort through the results.
Sure.
When you take that out of my hands and you give me one result, or at least the overview, and maybe half as many or a third as many results as I used to get, being lazy, which is what I started with, the whole premise of it, is I won't look at any other thing, like you just said, than whatever the AI is telling me. But what I know when it's telling me, because I've done enough AI queries across multiple personalities and forms of question, asking the same question in 6 different ways and seeing how crazy the answers or how separate or variable the answers could be, what I learned is the answer isn't always accurate. And the best way to get accuracy is to have multiple results and sort through them yourselves.
Of course.
And whether it's accurate in its factual nature or whether it's accurate in terms of its relevancy to me, well, both of those are important, right? And I don't want an AI telling me which is the most relevant or the most accurate because, well, frankly, it doesn't always tell you that.
Yes.
It doesn't give you a confidence level as to its answer. And I've seen hallucinations that are unbelievably wild.
Me too.
And I think to myself, okay, if the average person who did this query on any AI got this answer and said, oh, the founders of IVX were some pharmacist and some other knucklehead whose names are never associated with the company, not ever, anywhere, anytime, they'd go, oh, okay, that's how it was founded? Oh, okay. They wouldn't even know to answer.
Take it at face value.
They would have no idea that the answer was that fundamentally wrong.
Well, so AI responds in a lot of ways the way a child does, in that if it doesn't have accurate information available, it just makes something up and says it confidently and just kind of assumes that you're not going to know the difference, right? And this is the way toddlers lie about things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that it reflects the maturity of the technology, right? When did we first start using smartphones constantly? 2007, 2008, okay? So the first smartphones are only now old enough to legally drive. They can't quite vote yet, but all of society relies on them.
But they've been drinking while I'm here.
Yeah, right. But we've been so quick to place our trust in these immature technologies. And when you do that, you're not demanding the maturity emerge from the product. Okay? And so we've been so quick to adopt immature AI and become reliant on it, we're not demanding more maturity out of the builders.
Because while we're taking the search popularity ranking out of it, if you presented me with 7 different results or 9 different results just on the first page, and I clicked on 3 of those 9, that would reduce the value of the other 6, right? Because I clicked on those 3 and improve the value of those 3. So next time somebody searches on the same thing, those search results are going to get ranked maybe differently, right?
Sure.
Now, I'm talking about me individually. I'm talking about thousands of people searching on similar things and ranking.
And that's how PageRank works.
Yeah, that's how it works, right? Well, when you take that out of the equation, again, it goes back to, on the one hand, to your advertising point, like, well, what is an advertiser going to get on a page that now nobody's even going to go to because the AI summary Well, they don't need to click on it.
Right.
I just got the
Right.
abstract that I needed from all of these different results. When in fact, they probably didn't even use those results to create that abstract. Who
So-
knows what they used
Don, are you familiar with this idea of brain rot
as it applies to AI?
as it applies to...
Because I know what it is without that.
Right. Well, so there's this concept of brain rot that is largely older generations applying it to younger generations and saying, younger generations, they don't have any time or they don't have any attention span. They just, scroll through TikTok all day. They get their information from a 30-second video. They don't do any research. They don't think for themselves. And all of these things are true to a degree, but I'm always motivated to ask why. Why do they behave like this? Why does somebody do what they do? And you're taking the time to do research, to come to your own conclusions, and I do that as well. But I think that is a product of our environment and the way that we were taught to behave, where older generations have had a lot more economic security in the sense that they had time to do things. And younger generations, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the productivity and income split started in the late 70s. And now productivity has gone up by more than twice, many times more. And yet income has just kind of stayed in the same area. Okay. And so my thesis is that the younger you are, the more you've been taught not to take time, to do, act, work, to contribute more and more, to be more and more productive, but you're not getting paid more. Okay, so I'm reminded of something that my dad said one time. When he first started working, his quota was to interact with 4 clients per day. He was in insurance. And when he retired, he told me, just in passing, he was like, well, now if I don't reply to 4 clients in the first hour that I'm at work, I'm under quota. And so like the rate that we can do things, technology has enabled us to do a lot more work, but it's also given us this pressure to get a lot more done in a short period of time. So I think one of the reasons that younger people will just rely on whatever they're told, they're not going to think critically, they're not going to look for other sources of information, is not only that they've been taught to behave that way, but they don't have the leisure to like take the time necessary to think for themselves. Or if they do have that time, they haven't been taught how to make use of it.
When you say they haven't been taught, is that a miscue on the part of our education system, or is that just a lack of curiosity on the part of the person who hasn't been taught?
So,
I mean, how did you teach yourself all these things? I worked in the semiconductor industry for 10 years. I've been in technology most of my life. I moved into healthcare back in 2008. Didn't skip a beat. I mean, I had a lot to learn, but I took the time to do it. And in some respects became an expert in both fields in the course of my lifetime. And yet I have no formal education to support that. So how did I get to know all these things?
Right.
If I didn't take the time, and what you're saying is, over the course of a 40-year career, when I was raising children and, moving across the country because my company needed me to, or whatever it was, no matter what other distractions I had, obviously having children and family is not a distraction, but, it is. And
it takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time. But yet we carved out the time. I carved out the time to learn 2 industries well enough to be successful in both. And what's stopping people from doing that today? What's holding them up? I hear, yes, we have to be more productive. Yes, my quota, requires more of this than it used to. Okay, but back when I used to do bank reconciliations by hand, I couldn't do as many in a day as I could do now electronically on my bank, website. Right. Okay, does that make me what? I still have to do them, right? Every business person has to do them. But now I can get a lot more done much more quickly. Right. And it's a matter of me just logging onto the website right after dinner, and by the time I go to bed, I'm done with a whole month's worth of work.
Right. And most of that...
Where before, I used to have to go in on the weekend and spend a Saturday afternoon sorting through bank statements and checkbooks and crap like that to accomplish the same thing. So,
yeah,
I mean,
and it's all automated.
right. But
Or mostly automated.
But when you say that the young people don't have time because of these sort of productivity demands, how did I have time when there wasn't the tools to produce that productivity, and I had to do that same shit by hand? Where did I get the time to do that?
Well, so
where'd that come from?
What we're really talking about here is nature versus nurture. And this is the intractable question. Like, are we who we are because of who we are innately or because of how we're taught to be? And frankly, I think it's both, right? There is who is responsible for someone's actions, the individual or society. And the exact line that we cut it on, like what percentage of your responsibility is assigned to you versus society, that depends on the person, it depends on the culture, it depends on our opinions and beliefs. But there's always this question of how do we divide that responsibility? And that's the same question that you're asking me now. Are they responsible for their own choices and actions?
Yeah.
Or to what extent does society carry its own responsibility? Because remember, these are our children, whether in the literal sense or in the philosophical sense. Like, we educated them by putting them in a public school system. We decided what the agenda was for their education, the timing, how long they would be in there. They didn't make these choices. Children don't make choices like that. And so, like, to what extent society bears responsibility, I don't know the exact number, but I know that there is responsibility. But to your point, we also have to take responsibility for the choices we make and the actions that we engage in. And, like, you know, how much of who I am is because of what I've decided versus the outside influences.
Well, you made a really, I thought, poignant point earlier about how you decided to do things, that you had a number of choices and you just had to make those choices, right? One of those choices was to give away your keyboard, right? In favor of, I've got to go pursue this thing for this company I want to start. Is it that today young people think they don't have choices, or that these are not their choices to make, that it isn't up to me if I choose to learn how to be better at spreadsheets so I can get this work done more quickly? Or I should be better at, I don't know, mail merging in Microsoft Word so I can get these whatever out to as many clients as I need to as quickly as possible. I don't want to have to learn that. I mean, we all know that most of these productivity apps, you know, people use about 20% of their capability, and the other 80%, they don't even know it can do that.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And if you wanted to be more productive, maybe you'd learn a few of those things, right? And that would allow you to accomplish your work in much less time than before, and then you'd have time to go play your keyboard. But you don't have time to play your keyboard because you're not willing to learn the ways, the most efficient way to get things done. It's kind of like the people that are railing against the Doge thing going on today. I mean, how are you against, fraud and abuse? How are you against, creating greater efficiencies? How are you against that? Now, disrupting people's lives and their livelihood and their jobs. Yeah, okay, I get all that, and I understand why people are pissed off. I think that the mission is right. I'm not sure the method is right, but we can talk about that.
That's the constant tension here is, when someone tells us what their purpose is, are they being honest with us about that, right? So, like, one of the ways that propaganda works is the division between the words you use and the actions that you take. So you tell someone, I am going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you actually do A, B, and C under the umbrella of this false concept, okay? And what I'm trying to say is that everyone has a visible, let me go back to something that Hillary Clinton got in a lot of trouble for saying in 2015, 2016. She was at a donor dinner and was caught on video saying that there's a difference between a public purpose and a private purpose. And the public purpose is the reason that you give people in order to manufacture consent for whatever your objective is. The private purpose is the real reason you're doing it, okay? And so everyone has these public purpose and private purpose. And rarely rarely can they be the same, because you tell someone, well, I'm doing such and such for the betterment of mankind, and the private purpose is because I want to be wealthy and comfortable, right? So like,
I'm not sure I'm buying what you're selling, to be honest with you.
That's fair. That's fair.
There are multifaceted outcomes to actions, and to say that it's singular, that the only reason he's doing this is because of that.
It's never that simple.
That could be hypothetically a thing that falls out of this. But did he say he was going to do that? No. Do you think he's going to do it? I don't know. It depends on whether you trust the guy or not, right? And
which is true for everything.
Is he doing it? No. We don't have any factual support for that hypothetical, right? And so if your feelings about it are driven by a hypothetical for which there's no proof, but only because you suspect somebody has a different agenda than what they told you, that's a pretty cynical way to go through life.
Oh, yeah.
Is it not?
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to sit here and go, well, why is Tim really on this podcast? Is he promoting something? Is he going to pitch me for money? Is he, looking for me to invest in his company? Is he out, pitching investors, trying to do this new thing that he's doing? Or is he just here really because he wants to share his experience and, all the kinds of things that made him the person he is and how he got to sit in this chair today at this moment? And I could ascribe all kinds of things to your motives to be here.
Of course.
And, well, probably 90% of it would be wrong.
Right.
But there's nobody to refute me because why? I just made this shit up. Right? I don't have any factual basis for it. But, Tim might be here just to pitch me on, because I meet a lot of people. Ever since I exited IVX, everybody thinks I have a bunch of money. Right? I have a lot of new friends. All of a sudden.
Yeah, funny how that works.
Yeah, people I haven't heard from in years are calling, right? Hey, Don, how you been? How's it going?
Been too long.
Yeah, it's been too long, buddy, and I see you started a bunch of companies, and, I'm looking to start my own company, and, all of a sudden it's a pitch for money, right?
Of course.
And so, do I fault them for that? No, of course they know me, and, what is raising money? Much of it is, who you know, not what you know, right? And so I don't have a problem in the main with that. But what I have a problem with is people ascribing motives to me that they have no clue about. Well, I remember Mary Birch when I was early on in the Silicon Prairie Technology Association, and I was sitting on the board of the Enterprise Center in Johnson County, and I think she was head of the Overland Park Chamber at the time. And she told me that, she said, in front of the whole group, she said, the only reason Don Peterson's on this board at the ECJC is to feather his own nest. And I'm like, I don't even have a customer in this town. In fact, I don't have a customer in this state. I don't have a customer in the Midwest. Well, in what way would I be feathering my nest being here in Kansas City? In fact, I shouldn't be in Kansas City at all. All the money I raised came from the Valley.
And how is the
all of my customers are in the Valley
any more valid than anybody else that might be there?
Right. But this is the kind of shit I'm hearing today, though. Well, he's doing it because he's going to, line his own pockets, and he's going to, really? I mean, if I had to pick somebody to go do this who is not an insider, because all the insiders for decades have claimed they're going to do it and haven't done it, so I don't trust any insider to actually go do anything like this. An outsider who has no pecuniary motive, right, who could give a rat's ass that his stock has dropped by 50% since the first of the year because he's still the richest man on the planet. What motive would he have other than to be this little sort of quirky, nerdy messenger saying, hey, Trump, here's what's going on here. I don't know what you want to do about it, but I don't have any authority. It's been made very clear he has no authority to do anything. And yet people are bombing his freaking dealerships. I mean, I got doxxed yesterday because I used to own a Tesla. My name, address, phone number's on some fucking website that I actually posted this morning on LinkedIn and said, whether you're a current or former Tesla owner, they all think any Tesla owner or former owner must be a right-winger because these people are coming after you. They're doxing everybody. I mean, is that really the way that liberals are going to win the hearts and minds of voters again? Probably not.
This is the way it's always been, though, Don.
Well, that's the pendulum swinging too far. It's not hesitating anymore. It's just gone off the rails. And yet I want to come back to this notion that young people don't have the time to do the things that we did because the productivity demands of them are greater. They're greater, I think, equal to the tools that they now have at their disposal.
Correct.
So like in your dad's case, when he had to go out actually and get in his car and drive to go visit those 4 clients, right? That took all day to do because the client's not necessarily going to be on time. I got traffic. I got things to deal with. If I can make 2 calls in the morning, go stop for lunch, and go make 2 calls in the afternoon, and by the end of the day, I've done my 4 calls, I'm good to go, right? Well, all of a sudden now you've got LinkedIn. I mean, we were talking to one of the entrepreneurs in this series of podcasts, and if you want to go find a customer today and it's a particular company, you just go on LinkedIn and you can find out who's in charge of that department, and you can actually reach out to them on LinkedIn.
Right.
When I was growing up, you didn't know who it was. You didn't know how to get to them. And if they were a forward-thinking company, maybe they had voicemail.
Right. Right.
And you would have to go to the switchboard and say, I want to talk to so-and-so. And then so-and-so would never answer their phone.
Pull out the yellow pages,
Yes.
look them up alphabetically.
And you would get voicemail. And the likelihood of them calling you back was pretty low.
And now you can go straight to the person.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm glad we came back to this because I wanted to.
Yeah, we can get off on this whole politics
thing.
thing.
I could do that
never
all
come
day.
back from it. And I'd love to talk to you more about it, but I think that I want to get back to this entrepreneurial thing because I really want to get to the companies that you've started, what their purpose is, what you accomplished in doing them, and where you're at today with the PaynPoint thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
I want to know more about that because, I've always had this negative disposition towards bots because I always hear about, well, you're not interacting with a human, you're interacting with a bot, and yet you're out promoting bots. So I want to hear about the bot world and how you deploy favorable or good bots to make good things happen, because that's a little bit foreign to me, but I want to hear about it. But I want to get back to this notion of the younger generations having less time to do things because they have more they have to accomplish.
So this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And, I hear my peers and siblings complain that like their kids don't know how to have a conversation. And I was telling you earlier about my own motivation to just go out and socialize and relearn how to talk to strangers. And like, I think about my grandparents and how much of their interaction in their entire life was face-to-face versus how much of it was intermediated by a form of media. And that media might be TV, radio, telephone. And then I think about my parents and how much of their life was face-to-face versus intermediated. And myself, and I work from home at a computer, and everything that I do, other than something like this, is intermediated. There is media between myself and somebody else. Well, so then I think about like kids today, they don't buy cars in order to drive to the mall and hang out together in person. They interact with each other online. And obviously they interact at school, of course, But the point is that over time, more and more of our social interaction has been mediated by a form of technology that sits between us and the other person. And so this complaint, kids don't know how to talk anymore, is largely, in my opinion, a product that they always expect a machine to sit between them and somebody else. And on top of that, this machine is not neutral. This is not a machine that is existing to take care of you, to make you better. It's not a machine that has no purpose other than what you tell it. It is a machine that is designed by an organization that wants you to buy and sell. Okay, the communication company wants you to buy and sell, the internet service provider, every web page that you go to, every application that you use, every interaction is continuously monetized. And most of these monetized interactions are not from a child paying for an app, okay? Because most kids don't have any money.
Yeah.
And so what happens is these applications are monetized through advertising. And when you have advertising, you want more and more of someone's attention. And these applications are designed to create a dopamine cycle. Are you familiar with dopamine cycles?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so something happens and you feel good. And so then you do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they're all built on activating these really deep neurological functions that make us temporarily feel good. And then you want to come back. It's like a vape. You want another hit. You always want another hit.
Yeah, it's crack. It's crack.
Yeah. And so like from the time that a child is given a tablet to watch YouTube because their mom's too busy to pay attention to them directly for whatever reason, too busy or actually too busy, they are taught to not only continuously interact with a form of media, but a form of media that gets them hooked on a dopamine cycle. And then that dopamine cycle is monetized by multiple outside forces. And so, basically, I think the problem here, the question of time, why does a crackhead never have enough time? Well, because they always want to be getting high, right? And the way that we're teaching our kids to get high is through this constant dopamine cycling of interacting with media. They're deprived, whether intentionally or unintentionally, of real human interaction. Like when you're with someone, you can feel them.
Yeah.
Right? Like you ever get close to somebody and you just feel their warmth, their heart is glowing, or you get close to somebody and you're like, ooh, this person's dangerous, I got to stay away.
Or just the right person walks into a room of a group of people and, your eyes shift to them, you pause, whatever conversations you were having, waiting for that person to come in. And, some people walk in a room and you don't even notice them, right? So there's that personal aura. And I'm a big believer, quite frankly, in people coming to work and working together. I believe teams are much more innovative and supportive when they're together and they know each other and they see each other in the hall and they know that people have good days and bad days and better days and worse days, and that life is an analog. It's not a digital world. I'm sorry, if you live behind your laptop and you don't interact with people, you think of the world as digital. It's not. People are not on all the time.
Right.
People are having bad days. You have no idea what's going on behind the scenes with them. If they came to work crying that morning, were crying in their car because of some blow up they had with their spouse before they came to work, or you have no idea, right? Their mom passed away 2 weeks ago and they're still dealing with the grief. You don't know. And when you're with people and around people, if you're working on projects that are similar or even dissimilar, just asking about that. How's that going? Is that working? Did that ever work? Did you ever get that to work? You wouldn't ask that in a Zoom call with a specific agenda, which is everybody. Well, you got to have an agenda for your meeting.
Right.
No, those are the worst kind of meetings. If you're bringing your real leadership team together, or whoever you're bringing together, if you set the agenda, then that's all you're going to talk about. Oh, we checked all the boxes. Okay, bye. See ya.
Right.
Oh, I never mentioned this, or I really thought we should talk about that.
Right.
Or
it wasn't on the agenda.
Right. And it doesn't require the entire group. It just requires one or two or three people to run into each other. I mean, when Apple designed that saucer, campus in Cupertino, I thought that was brilliant. Why? Because you have to walk past people to get from one end of the building to the other, right? You're not going to walk around, right? So you're going to walk across. Well, what happens? You're running into people.
Collisions.
Hey, Tim, how'd that project go?
Right.
Did you ever get that done?
Right.
Did it ever work?
Right.
What color did you decide to paint it? Oh, why? Why did you do that? Well, the blue wouldn't work because it was interfering with this or that, and so we decided to go with the black. Oh, okay, that makes more sense. I get that. Okay, great. Next time I do that, I have to use black. I mean, there's just so many little nuanced things that just never transpire, never pass from one person to another because you're just not proximate.
Right. I completely agree. And like what you see online is somebody's highlight reel. You don't see, you only see what they want to show you. And that's especially true on an ad-driven platform where you mostly see what someone is paying to show you.
Well, I think for young people, they have been victimized by social media in a way that they don't realize they are the product. So this dopamine cycle that you're talking about, they want you to experience that because that just brings you back for more, right? They're like dope dealers.
Right.
They're really selling you crack cocaine.
That is absolutely it.
And they know that you have to come back for more. And, when you have Instagram and Facebook and all these, when you also need a TikTok, why do we need TikTok? It's just another form of the same thing. It's just more of it. And I feel for our younger generation, even the youngest generation. I see my grandkids with their iPads. And I think to myself, could they get through a day without that? We were talking, my son-in-law and I were talking about the kids going to bed on time at night and goofing around, and making it difficult. And he said, I keep threatening to take their iPads away. It just doesn't seem to have any effect on them. I said, yeah, why? Because you actually want to give them those iPads because you want some peace and quiet, or mom wants some peace and quiet for a period of time. And how do you keep them peaceful and quiet? Give them an iPad.
Give them the iPad.
Right? Because why? They're on it and they're absorbed
and
in
their
it.
Dopamine cycling.
And the dopamine cycle's going, and they don't need you to reinforce their thinking or give them that dopamine rush because they're getting it from somebody in the screen, inside of a screen. And yet, I said, well, maybe you ought to make the iPad a reward for the right behavior instead of a punishment for the wrong behavior.
Right.
And I know that that's the answer or that is the right answer, but if it isn't working, to use it as a cudgel,
then
maybe you should stop doing that.
Yeah.
It's not effective. But I can say, these kids are 5 and 7 years old, 6 and 7 years old, and they are already victims.
Addicted.
They are the product. I think this is where young people are really not self-aware enough to realize that you are the product.
Well, and see, this is what I'm getting at with this whole time and attention thing is like, the only people that really care about you are going to be your family and friends and the people that you spend time interacting with. And when you spend less time interacting with others, there are fewer people that care about you.
Yeah.
That's just the natural state of it. And like when it comes to self-improvement, when it comes to gaining wisdom and knowledge, making money, just being better, or being who you truly are or want to be, very few people encourage that other than your family and friends, your intimate relations. And anybody that is not part of that group is going to have a secondary purpose, okay? And usually that purpose is making money. So you might say, well, the trainer at the gym wants me to be more fit. Well, that's true, but that's an outcome of you paying them to train. Okay. Or you say, well, the college wants me to be, more educated, but that is a consequence of you paying to attend that college. And so when you hook kids in these dopamine cycles, and most of the influence that they get is the highlight reel from somebody else's life or manipulation through advertisement to desire things, these are not inducements to be a better person. They're inducements to do what the communicator wants you to do.
Yeah.
So like, why don't they spend time improving themselves? Because that makes their life better. But if they spend time consuming TikTok and Instagram, that makes the lives better for people that build and operate and advertise on TikTok and Instagram.
Yeah. But see, that's the point I think I was trying to make before, is that there has to be a point at which you realize that. And you say, whoa, wait a minute. If I want to achieve things, whatever they are, wealth, fame, fortune, I have to sacrifice some of this in order to achieve that. If I go down this social media, rabbit hole all the time, and I get caught up in this dopamine cycle, and I never say, geez, I'm addicted to this. I got to stop this. This is harmful to me. It's like smoking. It's a cognitive dissonance. They know it's not good for them,
and they keep doing it.
Yet they keep doing it. And whether it's a parent or a friend or a professor or somebody saying, stop it, just stop it.
Right.
You're doing so much harm to yourself. At what point does the individual say, you're right?
Well,
I gotta fix this. This is not real. I mean, really, there should be social media anonymous, 12-step program to get these people off. They're addicted to this.
Self-responsibility and accountability are two of the most important and yet difficult things to do.
Yeah.
And like a lot of it comes from self-reflection. If you don't ever stop and think about what you're doing, but like, did you come up with these ideas on your own, or did somebody put it in your head and say, Don, you need to improve yourself, right?
I had a period of time where my company, AMD, was trying to move me here, and I was in Chicago, and I didn't want to come here. I wanted to go to Silicon Valley because that's the epicenter of all things semiconductor. Why would I want to go to Kansas City? It's like, what? It's like a sentence. I do something wrong, And so they said, well, we don't need you to go down there right away, but, probably going to be next spring or next year. And I like, okay, so in the meantime, I get to go fight for going to Silicon Valley instead of going to Kansas City. But either way, I'm here for another year, right? So what did I do? I said, okay, I've got 52 weeks to kind of sit on my hands, kind of maintain the status quo. What should I do about that?
Mm-hmm.
And I made a decision to read a self-help business type, like Edward Demings and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
I read a book a week for 52 weeks. And that was probably the best education I'd ever gotten.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot about metallurgy and semiconductor technology and things I didn't know. I learned a lot about business and about, process technology and things like that I didn't know. And I learned a lot about psychology and people and how to be a better, sales manager, how to be a better manager myself. And as a result of that, I thrived in an environment where, most people thought I would not.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to, an outstanding career at AMD. And they did eventually move me to California. And, I got to do the things I wanted to do there. But had I not invested in myself that way,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of that would have happened
Mm-hmm.
or how good I would have been at it while it was happening.
Right.
And, the level of competence I developed gave me a lot more confidence because I think one begets the other. I guess a kind of a correlation there between competence and confidence, right? And so as a result, not only was I able to achieve everything I wanted to do at AMD, but I was able to leave at the tender age of 36 and go start my first company with the arrogant belief that I knew everything I needed to know, which clearly I didn't.
Yeah.
And I learned the hard way that I didn't. But I knew enough, right, that I could go get this thing launched, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about your first
Yeah.
foray and the series of companies that have come since.
Yeah, well, so I started with trying to sell the CDs, and my goal was to basically get a kiosk in the mall where people could do it themselves. I was thwarted, but that led to a general recognition that I was pretty good with computers. And so people would come to me and ask me to fix their computers, and I didn't want to do that. And so I would tell them outrageous prices, and to my surprise, they'd say, yeah, okay. I'm like,
Damn it.
darn, it worked, but it didn't work because I didn't want to do it.
Now I got to go do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did that for years, just on the side, and I built up a client list, and eventually I was just sick of it. So I sold the client list to somebody else. And this was about the time when I decided that I really wanted to be in tech. And so I went back to get an education as an electrical and computer engineer because I didn't have the self-confidence to think I could do all the math. And what I learned eventually was that it was a question of really just doing what you're told in a very precise and accurate way, just repeating exactly what they showed you. Well, so anyway, while I was in college, I started dating this woman who had a very American problem. And the problem was that she had too much demand and didn't know how to keep up with supply. She was an Indian woman that I met, and we dated for years. And her mom would send her a chai blend from India. And every time she would get it, her friends would come over and drink it all. And she would complain, well, I can't turn them away. They're my friends. But then they drink all my chai and then I don't have any. And I said, oh, honey, you got to Americanize this problem. You have unmet demand and insufficient supply. So I said, let's start buying the chai and making it and selling it. And so we set up a website and sold out the first day. And none of the people that bought it were her friends. But we had more chai than we knew what to do with.
Yeah.
And so we continued building and building, and we got to the point where we were doing about $10,000 a month. And I had to make a decision. We had to make a decision. We were not getting enough to really survive off of. But if one of us made the leap within 6 months or a year, we'd be doing great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was by then running my fourth company, Integrated Roadways, and she was an immigrant, and so staying in the U.S. was a constant battle.
Sure.
So she couldn't do it, and I had already taken too much money from people for Integrated Roadways.
You couldn't
split
your time.
Yeah. So, we tried to hire a series of managers, and what you learn quickly is that no babysitter loves the baby as much as the parent does.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody was willing to make the effort. And so eventually we had to let it go. But I'll tell you, Don, I only finished my supply of chai about 6 months ago.
So you had a lot of it.
A lot of chai.
A lot of chai.
And when we split up, she took half of it. So that should
There
just
you
tell
go.
you. But anyway, well, so what I really wanted to do was help build America's infrastructure.
Yeah, so that's where I met you.
Mm-hmm.
You were working on integrated roadways. You had some really cool ideas about how to build technology into the roads so that newer technology cars could take advantage of existing or emerging technology. So talk about that. I want to know more about the, because I don't know that I ever went deep with you on exactly what was the technology, how are you going to deploy it, and ultimately what happened.
Yeah. Well, so I had these series of realizations because I worked in construction whenever I was younger. And I realized that construction doesn't use interchangeable parts very much. Everything is built in place uniquely. And of course, you have a lot of interchangeable parts that are used to make it. But fundamentally, construction is changing what exists right here and now into something different. It happens in place. So I realized that if we could take advantage of two things, interchangeable parts and factory production, we could build roads in a factory as a modular series of components, like a Lego kit, but a giant one, that we would be able to accelerate construction, make it last longer, make it less expensive. This is the whole reason that we use factories and interchangeable parts. But this was back when connected electric and autonomous vehicles were first starting to get exciting for people. In 2005, DARPA funded the Grand Challenge, which was $5 million for anybody that could make a car go from point A to point B in the desert autonomously. The idea was to make autonomous Hummers for the invasion and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, didn't turn out that way, but I realized that they were building all of this expensive tech into the vehicle. But there is not a network on Earth that works because of the device. They all work because of the infrastructure. Right? And so I realized that if we put the network into the infrastructure, that the infrastructure could then pay for its own existence, just like a telephone network pays for its own existence. Right now, the American public subsidizes through tax revenues trillions of dollars of roadways, okay? And those roadways enable economic development, but they don't directly contribute to the financial health of our economy. And so I realized, Don, if we shifted roads from being a tax subsidy to paying for their own existence in the same way every other network does, if we built them using interchangeable parts from the factory, we could enable this self-support and provide network services for connected electric and autonomous vehicles that would dramatically reduce the scope of the problem for operating connected electric and autonomous vehicles, financialize that, and make the cars more affordable. Basically, if the network provides most of the functionality, you could do a software update to an average vehicle that exists right now, and it would be able to drive itself.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize was that I was basically trying to upend an industry that does not respond to market forces because it's designed to not care about market forces.
Yeah.
And this is the perverse incentive behind any industry that's funded with taxes, is that they don't really have any reason to evolve or change.
Right.
The people that are paying for it must pay for it by obligation, not by choice. And so the joke in the industry is that as soon as we know that it works, we stop doing it.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because when you don't know that it works, you can get grant funding in order to pay for the R&D. Once you prove that it works, you can't get grants anymore, and now you have to compete commercially.
Yeah, this is and that's true across the board, I think, in terms of research. that the government will pay for research. They want to pay for applied research. Applied research now is up to who's ever going to win commercially to make it so.
Correct.
And those are big gambles. And yet the government won't support that the same way, which is why when, Obama, like gave a bunch of money to Solyndra and people like that, it's like, no. You can give money to making solar panels and solar technology more efficient, more effective, more affordable, and all those good things. But don't pay a company. Don't pick a winner or loser here, because selling panels may not be the winning strategy here. Maybe selling the technology, the Chinese or the Vietnamese who are going to make the panels, maybe that's the strategy here, right? Because, again, the American workforce does not want to work for Chinese wages. They just don't. So can the Chinese outcompete us if the technology is all the same? Absolutely, because their cranks are bigger, and those cranks will turn for a lot less money per crank than they will here in the U.S. And even this stuff that Trump's trying to do with tariffs, I'm sorry, it's not going to fix that. These are economic realities that you cannot change.
Right.
Fundamentally cannot change.
Exactly.
Americans are not going to work for $4 an hour. They're just not. I lived in Southern California for a while, and there were strawberries and tomatoes laying on the ground and oranges and things like that. It's like, why? Because Americans won't come and pick those up.
Right.
And if we can't bring the Mexicans in from down south to come in and harvest these things before they hit the ground, then they just don't get harvested.
Well, and Americans literally can't afford to work for those
No, they can't,
wages.
because their housing and everything else costs so much. I can't work for $4 an hour because I can't make a living for $4 an hour. It's the same argument you make when adults are working in fast food restaurants. No, they weren't supposed to be your job. Those were our high school kids, right? Let a high school kid flip the burgers for $4 an hour. I know you can't make a sustainable wage and support a family at that. I know you can't. But paying $15 an hour or $20 an hour to have you do it is going to make the burger unaffordable, and then you've changed the demand curve so radically. Now you cannot predict how long you'll be able to earn $15 or $20 an hour flipping burgers. Sorry.
This is what I found most amusing about what happened during COVID, is that people fought for $15 an hour for fast food for like a decade.
Yeah.
And the government did essentially nothing to help them. And then COVID hit, and all these businesses independently started paying 15, 20, whatever. And then after the market already changed to accommodate, a bunch of politicians rushed in to provide that support to start raising the minimum wage. And it's like, where were you guys 20 years ago, right? They're responding. They're not providing leadership. They are reacting to something that's already happened.
That's generally true, though, of most people. In my opinion. Most of us are reactive. The entire healthcare industry is reactive. Why don't we have well care instead of health care? Because in order to be well, it takes proactivity.
Yes.
Doctors don't know that.
Right.
You walk in, they ask you what's wrong, you tell them what's wrong, and they give you a fix for it, maybe. And if you don't get that fix, doesn't quite work, then we'll find something else that might, and we'll just try this. I love it when doctors say, well, let's try this. Try?
Yeah. Well, who's paying for it?
Well,
right?
Because you're paying, the patient's paying for it, so they can try a lot of things. But that's why medicine is an art, not a science. Because if it's kind of like during COVID. Well, ivermectin has never been proven to reduce the spread of coronaviruses. So, so doctors prescribe crap off-label all day long. They do it all the time. And so for a doctor to prescribe an ivermectin that's an antiviral to be given to somebody against the virus seems almost logical if there's no other thing to give them, right? If there isn't anything else, as long as it's not doing any harm, which is the Hippocratic Oath, right? First, do no harm. Okay, if ivermectin isn't going to hurt you, then give it a try. It might not help you either, but it's better than nothing, which is what we're going to give you, nothing.
This is the problem that I ran into with integrated roadways.
Yeah.
Was that the people that made the decisions did not have benefits from a good decision. They only had consequences from a bad one.
But you see that everywhere. I mean, remember the thing called the Hackovate that H&R Block sponsored, and Herb C. kind of ran it, and there was several companies that they brought in. I was told later, and you may know differently, but I was told later that the reason H&R Block did that is because they were looking for disruptive, innovative things that they could adopt.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not trust their own innovations department to do it,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody in the innovations department was ever going to tell the operating people that the stuff you're doing isn't good enough.
Yes. It has to come from the
It
outside.
has to come from the outside.
This was Clay Christensen's, he had the innovator's dilemma, and one of the things that he wrote it, and one of the things he realized was that innovation always comes from the outside, not only because you can't undermine your current business, but because people can't challenge the current power structure within that business, which is largely the same thing. And so what I kept running into was, I would try to get public agencies to adopt our tech, and they would say, well, it's not proven. And I would say, well, every piece of it is proven individually. And they'd say, well, it hasn't been proven together. So then I have to prove it together. And then they say, well, it's not proven for us. And then I would have to prove it for them. And then they would say, well, it's not proven together for us right here. And so every single time they needed everything to be reproven. And the reason was that they would get punished if it failed, but they would not get a benefit if it was successful.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like we were talking about with, whether my grandkids should have their iPad or not have their iPad.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a stick, there's no carrot, right? And that's the same with the H&R Block Hackavate thing, right? There's no winning.
Mm-hmm.
There's only potentially losing.
Right.
And I don't want to lose.
Right.
I can't afford to lose. I need my job. I want to keep my job. And I think government, especially where taxpayers are funding things, who are mostly blind to it. You said, well, taxpayers being forced to do it. I don't know that, like USAID was giving away all this money to go do all these crazy things. I mean, I pay my taxes like everybody else does, and I hope that the government is doing the right things with it.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly we're learning that may not be the case. But the reality is that most people have no idea where their money's going. We're not in a position to direct where those funds are going. It's not like we're investing in our government and then giving sitting on a board of advisors saying, well, if you're going to spend my money, here's how I'd like you doing it.
Right.
And we're going to hold you accountable for doing it. It's
Right.
like the charging stations that Biden was going to build, and Buttigieg built 6 of them or something like that. It's like, really, where'd the other, $99 billion go?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it in almost every walk of life, right? And, it's frustrating as a citizen to see these things going on. But tell me, I guess, going back to your technology and what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So when you ran up against these, serial proof points,
Mm-hmm.
right? They kept moving the goalposts for you.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do?
Well, we always needed more time. We needed more runway. And you mentioned earlier that government doesn't fund applied research. And in order to win a government contract, as an anti-corruption measure, you have to be the cheapest in roadways. Okay. Now, that was intended to avoid giving freebies to friends, which is the way that it worked for a time. But whatever your decision matrix is, everybody optimizes to that. And so when you say it has to be the lowest cost, everybody optimizes to the lowest cost, not the most valuable, not the most innovative. So you manage what you measure, okay? And what we dealt with was that we couldn't be the cheapest because building in place had 100 years to develop, and modular construction had not. And contractors built their entire organization around building in place, so they weren't familiar. And so then we would have this cost delta, and we would need to get money from somewhere to cover the cost delta. And to get private investment from like a professional investment firm, they need some kind of proof of a return, right? They're not going to take a flyer on it, and at least not for somebody like me. And so we didn't have that proof because we hadn't done it before.
Yeah.
So we were caught in this chicken or egg. And we slowly got to the point where we found investment firms that would provide incremental capital for incremental demonstration of ability. Because everybody, Don, all these multi-billion-dollar organizations would say, well, you need $5 million, that's a rounding error.
Yeah.
And I would say, make the error. If it's a tiny amount of money for you, then let me have it. And they would say, well, and they have a million reasons
No, because
why.
they have to devote as much time to it as they would a $20 or $30 million investment.
Right.
Because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their limited partners. So they set the floor based on the number of partners they have who can sit on enough boards to shepherd the investments that they make. And
exactly.
the bigger the firms got, the bigger their wallets became, the fewer companies they could actually invest in because the bar was set so high that if you didn't need 20 or 30 or 50 million, sorry, you're a rounding error.
And the higher the bar, the more evidence is demanded, and the more evidence is demanded, the more mature something has to be.
Well, you'd like to think that, but I'm not sure that that was always the case. I think that there are a lot of exceptions to that particular notion, but I think in the case of you being the disruptor, I think this is true of all disruptors. People want to know what you're like. Well, are you like this? No, we're not. We don't do that. Well, but there's companies that are doing this. Yeah, but it's not what we're doing.
Right.
You know, same with me. When I started IVX, it's like, well, aren't there people who do infusions? Yeah, at the hospital. Well, then what's the big deal? Well, because patients don't want to go to the hospital.
Right.
Well, why wouldn't they want to go to the hospital? I mean, again, it's just this serial proof point thing. You know, well, if you could prove that you can open a clinic and run it for this cost, that's great, but we need to know that for a fact, and we need to see it repeatable. Oh, and by the way, you have a scientific means of projecting how many patients you'll actually have and how fast you'll have them? No, it's kind of like opening a restaurant. I can't tell you exactly how many patrons I'm going to have and how big the invoice is going to be on everyone, but we can design it to be in a particular way. But we still have to rely on the public and our advertising and everything else to make that happen.
Of course.
So the proof point will be when we do it.
Yes.
I can't give you that proof point before we do it.
Exactly.
Right? And you probably dealt with the same thing.
That was the
This is a disruptor's dilemma, I call it, because most of these MBAs, and I'll tell you, I say this all the time, and I don't mean to disparage MBA programs because I think in some places they're great. But from day one till day when it's over, all you're doing are case studies. And those case studies are what already exists.
Correct.
And so what you become as an MBA is a plane spotter. I can see the silhouette. Okay, I know that's a B-52. I can see the silhouette. Okay, I know that's a 737, right? But if I see something I don't recognize, it's a UAV, right? Or it's a something different. I don't even know what that is. Oh my God, what is that? I can't back it. I don't know what it is.
It's because we're pattern matchers.
Yes.
We think that we're intelligent, but what we're actually good at is recognizing similarities between different things.
Yeah.
If this, then that. Okay, this looks like what has worked before, and therefore it's probably something I can invest in. And when you get something too strange, it doesn't match a pattern, people don't understand. The problem here is that something that's unlike what you've ever seen before is either worthless or incredibly valuable. And telling the difference between the two is almost impossible.
Well, because a lot of it has to do with other forces, right? So in our case, Obamacare made sure that there were more and more people insured so that the services we could offer, people had insurance for. The poor people would go to the hospital and they'd go to a safety net hospital and maybe get the same service or the same drug. They wouldn't get the same service the same way, right? So what we tried to do was sell a first-class service at coach prices, and that became a winning strategy for us. But now that I've done it and we created these, independent clinics doing these kinds of things, I talked to one of our investors from IVX, and I mentioned something else I was thinking about that's very similar. And their response was, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Why? Because we already proved the model that way, that you can do these carve-outs and you can create these spaces where neither hospitals nor existing providers want to be in it. They're just not going to. But if we didn't do the first one, they would be just as skeptical about this new one.
Right.
And that's the nature of investors. One of the reasons, when I did exit IVX, I did not become an angel investor is because I won't. I mean, not that I won't invest. It's just I won't invest in something I'm not involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Because it has more to do with your operational skills, more to do with the decisions you make internally about whatever choices you've created for yourself than it does to do with money. Money is just not the answer for everything.
And this is what took me really far too long to realize, Don, is that there are two sides of the mirror, or the window, if you will. There is insecurity when you have insufficient resources to accomplish what you want. And then there is security where you have those resources, okay? And I have always, except for brief moments in time, lived in economic insecurity, okay? Never had enough, never had what I wanted. And so my perspective was twisted to think, well, everybody must think this way. We all think that everybody thinks the way we do, right? Or at least most of us do. And so I figured investors would be motivated by the opportunity to make huge returns by trying something new. And it took me far too long to accept that no, that when you get to the point where you can legitimately write a check for millions of dollars, yes, you do want an opportunity to grow that wealth, but what is more important is preventing the loss of the wealth that you already have, right? And so, like, people without much will take big swings to try to get more. People with a lot, they want to bunt so that they're guaranteed not to lose. At least I get on base.
I would put myself in that latter category. You know, for me at my age, I'm about wealth preservation. I'm not here to piss it away, because why? I'm not in a position to earn it back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this would have happened 30 years ago, and yeah, I could piss it all away and earn it back. I wouldn't have any doubt about that. But the reality is, I have a duty to myself and my family that, what wealth I have, needs to be dealt with in a very thoughtful and deliberate manner. And
That's right.
The less risk I take, the better off I'll be.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think this is why, you and I were commenting on some posts on LinkedIn about angel investors.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a rather jaundiced view of angel investors just in general, which is why I'm not one, because I don't want to be like them. But they are always looking for a coupon. Mm-hmm. They want a premium. They will tell you you're awful. You're distressed property, mm-hmm. right? You're a salvage title, mm-hmm. in order to get a premium out of you,
right?
Because that's the only way they can protect their downside, is to get more for less,
right?
Right. So I call them bottom feeders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a bottom feeder investor in my business, because all I'm going to get is a bunch of crap every time I need more money, because I can't. Especially when you're doing something really disruptive, I can't predict how much I'm actually going to need to accomplish all I want to accomplish.
That's right.
And so if I have to deal with a negative person who is trying to get a coupon out of me every time I'm doing it, mm-hmm. and trust me, I've dealt with people like mm-hmm. that. I'm going to look in the camera and say, and you know who you are. It just makes everything harder.
It does.
It makes it unfun. It saps your energy. It is really cause for a lot of discouragement, I think, amongst smaller companies who have taken angel money. I really believe that you should hold out. My first company, we ended up with venture capital, seed capital, right from the jump. And it was a much different experience than I experienced even my third company, after successes that I'd had, that I was dealing with angel investors and they were treating me like I was a redheaded stepchild. I mean, seriously, I got treated like I was impaired mm-hmm. in every way. And I was so resentful of that I'm sorry, I just won't be one, because I don't respect him.
Mm-hmm. And you end up with this dynamic where the investor is essentially asking you to lie to them.
Yes.
Through projecting false confidence in some guaranteed outcome that is impossible to guarantee. So you end up getting sorted into two categories: people that will not lie about their confidence in a future outcome, that then don't get the investment, versus people that will lie with confidence. And when I say lie, I don't mean that as such a harsh term. It's just presenting It's spinning it.
Yes. It's spinning it.
Right.
And I've certainly been in that mode many times. But I will tell you this. When at IVX, I did get a call from a large venture capital firm from California. It was a really interesting call. And he asked me how things were going. And I, it was very straightforward. I didn't lie. I said, no, we have operational challenges, and here's why, and here's what they are. And his response was, he said, Don, it's really great to talk to somebody like you. He says, because out here in the valley, I get so much sunshine blown up my ass, and listen to these people. They're perfect. They know everything. They're doing everything. They're amazing. They're awesome. And he said, to hear from somebody like you going, yeah, this has been really hard, and we really don't have this, and we really don't have that. He said, it's refreshing. He said, I want to help you more now, because not only do we like your business, I like you because you're just being honest with me, right? And I go, yeah, I probably even sugarcoating it a little bit. He goes, well, I would expect a little bit of that. He said, but you're being more honest than I hear out here.
Well, and you had the opportunity to develop that relationship, that trust, to where he knew you were doing your best.
This was the first phone call.
Oh, this was the
first phone call.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
Well, he's a very perceptive guy, and I think he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he grew up and he went to college in the Midwest. And so he had a Midwest sense of things. And I lived in the Valley. I mean, you're getting sunshine blown up your ass a lot of the time by people who want to be what they want to be, and that's cool. Good for them. I hope they get there. I hope they don't step on a lot of people getting there or lie to a lot of people like you were talking about to get there. But the reality is that if you're from this part of the world, and I'd say 70% of the people I met in the West Coast are from somewhere else, right? Many of them from the Midwest, right, if not the East Coast. So when you would meet people who are like-minded with similar values, you kind of gravitated together because, well, you weren't going to bullshit each other. The bullshit just kind of went away. And we used to talk about, you could smell bullshit coming around the corner because you knew the type. You knew it was easy to type people like that. And I think this guy from McKesson Ventures, I think he just resonated with him that I was just being mostly honest with him about what our challenges were. And I think he found that refreshing. And he said so. And it was the first phone call.
Well, I mean, that's fantastic. Like you really surprised me with that, because here I had my, preconceived notion that there was a relationship here.
No, I mean, literally, I picked up the phone. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was getting dressed to go to the office. And a 415 area code's calling me at 7 o'clock my time. It's 5 in the morning in San Francisco, and 415 San Francisco, right? So I like, hello, this is Don. Who's it? And it, hi, Don, this is so-and-so from McKesson Ventures. And I was like, oh, cool. Glad I picked it up.
Yeah, no kidding.
And he said, we've been keeping an eye on you guys. We've seen that you've grown into California and Chicago now, and we're interested in your company and what you're doing and find it kind of fascinating. And he said, do you need a financial partner? And I said, yes.
Man, that's great to find partners like that. And you see, Don, one of the things that we went through with Integrated Roadways, we made almost $2 million over the years.
Yeah.
We spent more than we made. We had to raise, by the end of things, we had raised almost $6 million. Okay. And the problem was that the industry that we were in doesn't do increments. There's no small revenue in roadways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at first I thought that was great because it meant one deal was worth millions of dollars. But it took me too long, you'll notice this is a theme, to realize that it also meant that I had to spend an enormous amount of time to convince people that what we were doing was worth the several million, whether it's the public agency taking a risk on a project, a financier taking a risk on financing it. And so the amount of time, well, time is money, and the more people you have, the more money time is. And I had to keep paying salaries because we all have rent or mortgages and food and families.
You have obligations, yeah.
Yeah. And so we were what Paul Graham calls default dead. Are you familiar with this idea?
No, but I can almost tell from the title.
Yeah, right? Well, so Paul Graham, most famous probably for Y Combinator now, sorts startups into default dead, default alive. Default alive will continue to exist for however long because they have clients paying them revenue.
Yeah.
Default dead, they need investment capital.
Yeah.
And so one of the current rules of Silicon Valley, because rules change all the time, is to only invest in default alive companies, which means they're already making revenue.
They have customers.
Yes. But you need investment from somewhere to get the business to that point. So we were the donkey that has the rider that's holding the stick out with the carrot on it, where we were always just a little too far away from the carrot to take a bite.
Yeah.
And every time we would go further, somehow the carrot would move just as far as we did.
Yeah.
Right. And I ran into this constantly with professional investors where they wanted to put in the money that we would use to get to profitability after we had reached the milestones that we needed the money to reach. And they're like, well, when you get everything done that you need the money for without the money, then I have the money.
Yeah.
So
that's not unusual to hear, though.
It's not.
I mean, I heard that even on IVX. I mean, I talked to one of the venture funds in Ohio, started by the son of a guy I knew in Silicon Valley. And they said, well, Don, when you have, 8 or 10 locations open, give us a call back.
Right.
Okay. So when I had 8 or 10 locations, I called them back.
Mm-hmm.
They decided not to invest even after that, right? And, in some respects, didn't need them to at that point, but, it would have been nice to have they done it the first time we talked to them. But, I could tell you that even the angel investors who put in $50,000 in the earliest rounds that we raised all got more than $1 million back on their $50K investment. Nice. And everybody who told me no along the way, I now get to say, nana, nana, boo-boo.
Right.
You missed out. Not that I feel that way. I just feel like, they made their decision and
of course.
We made ours. And those are choices that they probably could have made differently at the time, but they failed to see the opportunity.
That's right.
And that's
just part of life.
That's what it is, too bad. But I think in your case, you've had the constant struggle that a lot of entrepreneurs have of living in this world of scarcity, right? You've not had the opportunity, or maybe you have, but to correct me if I'm wrong, to be in a business where you have abundance. And there's a different approach to business when you're living in the world of scarcity versus the world of abundance. And we used to talk about this all the time in my companies, is that abundance comes not necessarily because of money, but because of customers. And I always have felt that companies who claim to be successful, who have yet to have real customers, repeat customers who are paying you dearly at good margins on a consistent basis that are reliable and sustainable for the long haul, they aren't really alive.
Right.
They're pretend alive.
It's
right?
default dead versus default alive.
And I see it in healthcare a lot. Well, we're doing a big pilot at Mayo Clinic, and we're doing a big pilot here. Okay, are they paying you for it? Well, no, not yet. But they're gonna, when the pilot's over, they're gonna. Yeah, you think so? I don't know. I used to be in the hardware and software business, and I can tell you there were a lot of, samples of stuff we used to ship into people who, it was a doorstop or, a boat anchor for a long, long time. We used to call it shelfware, right, where they actually never used the shit, right? And so they never got it into even an evaluation mode. So don't tell me that your pilot is going to result in income, because you don't know that.
Right.
And I think the prime example of that here in Kansas City is iVerify. They somehow gave credence to the fact that you could have a $100 million exit without a customer. And that's just bullshit. I'm sorry. That's bullshit. I mean, seriously, Toby should be thanking heaven, God's in heaven, every freaking day. It happens occasionally, but not very often.
But it's not right.
And that is not the way it's done. It's not the way you should do it. You should be going and finding customers before you even have the product. And know that they're going to buy the shit from you when you finally do have it.
Well,
and if you didn't do that, and you just think that because you have some cool technical thing, I'm sorry, but there are no technical solutions to real world problems. There are only real solutions.
Right. Right.
And technology enables the solution sometimes, but it is never the solution by itself.
Right.
Like your integrated roadways, you can have a lot of technology, but if you can't put it all together and prove it all at one time, given the conditions and context that the customer needs, I'm sorry, I don't give a shit how cool your technology is. It didn't work for me.
Right. And Don, it all comes down to belief. It's about what people believe about the world and what you have to offer them. Because everything that we do it because we believe something about it. Everything that we buy, we believe something about it. And we had clients that paid us, but I didn't understand the dynamic. And like looking back now, I see my mistakes clearly. Like I had these clients, and what I should have done was nurture that client relationship so that they would continue paying us month after month, year after year. And I saw what we did as a technology-driven product. And what I should have thought of it as is a recurring cost service, right? When the first time somebody wrote me a check, I should have made sure that they continued paying me a check of a size like that on a recurring basis, year after year. Yeah. I didn't think about it that way. And that was a hard lesson learned, because if those clients, if I had cultivated them and turned them into recurring payments, we'd still be around.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that. And so what really got us in trouble, though, was taking money from the wrong people. And that gets a lot of people in trouble.
And that's a road that's filled with potholes and obstacles, and there's going to be smooth sailing at points, and you're going to think the rest of the road is like this, and the rest of the road is not like that. Mm-hmm. No matter where you are in the life cycle of the company, as long as you need somebody else's money, you're at risk.
Yes.
You're always at risk.
Yes.
And it's always scary, and it should be, I guess. And the goal there is to stop taking other people's money as investment money and start selling the shit you're selling
exactly
to customers who willingly and want to give you their money in exchange for whatever it is you have that they value.
Exactly.
And until you get to that point, you're at everybody else's mercy. We were talking about this earlier, about not in control, right? I have this company, but I'm not necessarily in control of it, because why? You're controlled by your investors,
right?
And their whimsical nature sometimes. Mm-hmm. But until you have customers, you can't do anything about it,
right?
And I saw a posting of yours on LinkedIn talking about, pre-revenue, what did they expect? Well, pre-revenue, what I expect is everything,
mm-hmm.
because until you get the revenue, you're just an idea,
right?
Waiting to happen. You're just an idea waiting to happen. I'm sorry, I don't know that it's going to happen. I don't care that you have an app on the App Store. What's the attach rate, and how many people are buying the in-app purchases,
right?
And how much of that are they buying, and how often are they, renewing, and are they renewing at the rate that you're hoping for? And I ask people these questions. You talk about selling it versus renting it. I was talking to a guy about a device, a wearable that tracks all kinds of heart rhythms and things like that, and he was going to sell it. I said, sell it to whom? Well, sell it to the doctors, so they could give it to their patients. Mm-hmm. Okay, how about you rent it to the doctor and let him rent it to the patient, because the only thing the insurances are paying for is the duration of time that the patient actually is wearing it.
Right.
And when they're not wearing it, they won't pay you anymore. And then when they're done wearing it, they're going to give it back to the doctor, mm-hmm. right? And the doctor can rent it to somebody else.
There you
right?
go.
And he's going to charge the same amount, whether it was a brand new device or a used one.
Right.
Right? And he goes, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I go, well, that's the problem with not having experience in the healthcare industry, mm-hmm. is you don't know what the current mode of operation is.
Right.
You have a new device that's better than the current devices that are out there, mm-hmm. but you have to go to market with them the same way those guys have gone to market. Otherwise, you're not just trying to disrupt the technology that's being employed, but the methodology in which it's deployed.
And
you can't change all those things at one time. You just can't.
Right.
You're asking too much.
Right. One thing at a time.
Yeah, one little thing at a time. And if you ask for too much, the chances of you succeeding at it without a shit ton of money is mm-hmm. just really hard.
Right. And I totally agree.
Tell me about bots. Let's talk about bots for just a little bit. I want to hear about this. PaynPoint. I love that name.
Thank
I'm not
you.
sure I love the spelling, but it probably wasn't available to do it with an I, but I get it. PaynPoint, P-A-Y-N, point?
P-A-Y-N-P-O-I-N-T.
Okay, so the point stayed the same.
Yes, yes. Well, and the reason I chose it is because bots on websites are a pain point for the website operator. Uh-huh. And we provide the website operator a point of payment, a paying point that solves the pain point. So
okay.
In my small mind,
so
it's
pay
clever.
is actually part of the
yes.
reason to choose the Y
yes.
instead of the I. I get it now. Okay. That was lost on me.
Yeah. Well, so Don, I spent so many years doing advanced infrastructure for traffic data collection. And when it was over, I decided I wanted to do something totally different. Mm-hmm. So now we do advanced infrastructure for traffic data collection.
Okay.
Except instead of cities, it's websites. And you see, websites have a problem in that half of their traffic is bots, automated agents that are not people that show up and do stuff.
Scraping their site for whatever.
That's a big part of it. That's about 20% of a given site's traffic. And about 30% of a given site's traffic are bad bots that are trying to steal data, break in, mess up the website, whatever. Only a tiny sliver of their traffic are bots that they actually want visiting, the good bots, okay? And those are search engine indexers, search engine optimizers, bots that collect data for analytics, for performance, business intelligence, uptime, things like this. This is about 2%-ish of website traffic. Well, you see, the internet was built for humans, by humans, of humans, and bots have always been around at a low level. But all of our financial models depend on human traffic, right? So Web 1 was ads and e-commerce, Google and Amazon, basically. Web 2 was software as a service. During the global financial crisis, everybody started investing in SaaS, which is subscription. By then, digital media and publishers were learning how to live on the internet, and they wanted paywalls, which is another form of subscription. And so you have like basically business-to-business SaaS like Salesforce, business-to-consumer SaaS like Netflix or paying for a newspaper. Well, most people don't read a single newspaper anymore, right? They don't go to the KC Star and read the entire Star. They go on Twitter and just read links. They go on Reddit and read links, Facebook, whatever. They consume their media from 1,000 different sources. Most people don't want 1,000 different subscriptions.
Yeah.
So the other problem with the with the publishing industry is they used to make money on ads. Google took all of that. They used to make money on classifieds. Craigslist took all that. Personals, Tinder and Hinge and so on took all that. And the only thing that the publisher was left with was their cost center of producing journalism. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, as all of this was happening, bots were slowly marching along and growing in size. And about a year ago, bots became the dominant audience on the internet. If you look at any given website, 50% or more are going to be bots. Well, automated agents breed faster than humans do. And so for the rest of time, there's going to be a diminishing percentage of humans on your website and a growing percentage of bots. Okay? Well, this has all been invisible because analytics is for a website to make money, and money is made from humans, and bots are not humans. So analytics hides bots. So the first step to solving a problem is seeing it. Actually, it's admitting that you have it. That's the first step in AA, at least. But you can't manage what you can't, or you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you can't see. Okay, so most analytics hides bots, and so our first step was to throw the covers back and expose the problem, show people the bot traffic they have. And when we show people their bot traffic, most of them are like,
oh my God,
I had no idea. But the second step is to control the bleeding, right? This is triage, right? Like somebody showing up in the ER. First control the bleeding. And so the next thing that we did beyond the analytics for bots was to build controls for bots. Like you can limit the way this bot interacts with your web page. You can limit how frequently they ask for pages, what pages they can go to. There is a thing called Robots.txt that allows you to politely request a proper way to behave. And look, polite society is wonderful, but you have to have enforcement too.
Yeah.
And so we built Robots.nxt, which actively controls the way that bots interact. And the way that we do that is by basically being a firewall between internet traffic and the website. We catch all their traffic and we throw away anything that doesn't match the rules. You can't come in the bar if you're not going to behave, right? And we actively manage every single interaction with the website. So those are all, how do you want to say it? Vitamins, but what people really need is a medicine. Okay, saving money is not nearly as motivating as making money.
Yeah.
And so what we realized is that if bots are going to forever be the largest audience, websites have to monetize that audience, right? Like, they exist to make money, practically every website. So we needed a way to turn bots into cash flow. And I realized, and this is all very simple, it's rudimentary stuff, but nobody had done it before. Let's just charge them an entrance fee.
Yeah.
Price
of admission.
Yeah, price of admission. You got to buy the ticket if you want to take the ride. And one of our investors put it brilliantly, and I love this. She says it's ladies' night for the internet. Except humans get in free and bots have to pay the cover charge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because with humans, you've already got a lot of ways to make money. So just come on in and we'll make money the normal way. And so one of the reasons that I was talking so much about micropayments and transactions earlier is because what we did, we can see the bot, we can control the bot, and so we attached a cash register to where if the bot pays the till, now they can come to the website.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like one of the problems that websites have with bots is when AI overviews started to get populated into Google, well, somebody goes to Google and asks, oh, I've got this thing going on with my whatever. What do I do about it? Normally, you get a bunch of links and you click through and you read them, and like the websites get ad money. They get, maybe you got a problem with your roof. Hey, I need my roof fixed. You learn about it on this website, content marketing. And then you fill in their inbound lead funnel and say, hey, I might need a new roof. Give me a quote. That's how local professional services businesses work. Well, but if they get the answer from an AI, whether it's Google or, ChatGPT or whoever, there's not an immediate next step in the funnel to turn that into a source of revenue.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a user that we've been working with that they got harvested for AI overviews, and they lost 85% of their web traffic overnight because their answers were so good that Google wanted to show everybody.
Sure.
And so basically, we provide the tool to charge the bot to visit the website. And what I recommend is to calculate the economic value of your website to the bot, okay? Because like a lot of people see it and they say, well, I make 1 penny per page served to a human, so I'm going to charge 1 penny to the bot. That's not quite it, because how many people are not going to visit because the bot gives them the answer? So you may need to charge 10 times that amount to the bot. And so, Don, that's basically what we do. PaynPoint has the product Robots.nxt, and we make bot traffic make money for websites.
Who are your customers today?
Nobody.
Okay.
Not right now.
So you're still working on the technology?
Yeah, we are. We launched our product in December, and we onboarded about 20 websites, and we're getting feedback from them. And since January, we've added about 25 more websites. So we're up to about 45, hinting towards 50. We implemented the bot payment funnel in mid-January. So now, and this is all user-driven, right? Like they have to configure it for themselves. If you don't lock your own door, Schlage can't do anything for you. Anyway, we implemented the bot payment funnel. A couple of these sites have it turned on. And what it basically does is it blocks the bot unless the bot pays.
Okay.
But most bots can't pay. They haven't been built for that.
Right.
They've built on the assumption that they can just go take a website for free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what we're doing right now is accumulating users based on seeing bots and saving the site costs of operation in order to get enough users that when they turn on the bot payment funnel, the people that build the bots are motivated to actually pay.
Okay.
Because if they can just go somewhere else, then they will.
Sure.
Right? So this is kind of a critical mass thing where if enough websites are charging bots for access, then the bots will pay.
Yeah.
But that requires a bit of a build-up. You got to get a user
Sure.
base. Yeah.
But you think in time you can get enough websites configured in a way that they can charge a bot and that there's enough bots out there that they will pay
Yes.
to get to this content.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, we have this destination in mind, but there's many steps on a journey, right? And one of the things that I realized with integrated roadways, but too late, was getting people to pay you ASAP.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we can't wait until we have 10 million websites using us to make money off the bots. So what we're doing right now is basically monetizing the bot blocking, because if half of your web traffic is bots, but you only want like 2% visiting you, well, we can save you almost 50% of your website costs by turning on the bot management console right now.
Okay.
So first we save them money and use that savings to get more adopters that want to make the money. But, it's a journey.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you explaining it because I personally, like I said, I wasn't that familiar with how bots were impacting existing websites.
Mm-hmm.
I did think about the fact that the AI abstracts or summaries that you get would thwart actual page views of the various websites that actually contain that information that it was harvested from,
right?
And that the owners of those websites at some point in time would say, wait a minute, this is not fair.
Right.
You're using my content to train your bot or your AI on my content, and you're getting paid through advertising for it, and I'm getting bupkis.
Exactly.
How does that work?
Exactly.
So I remember Musk talking about this early on when he said, we think that AI can be dangerous only because there's people out there who think that the entire internet is their training database. ChatGPT was trained on the internet.
Right.
And, Google, I think in the old days, I don't know if they still do this, but they literally replicate the entire world of websites on their own servers and can do whatever the hell they want to with them. When you get a website from Google, you're actually getting their version of that website. And I don't know what the updates, what the time to live kind of things are for those anymore, but it was relatively long at one point.
Well, I mean, that's what accelerated mobile pages is about.
Yeah.
Google AMP, and you'll see it. You look at a website on your phone, and it'll be, amp.cbsnews.com or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But they've been doing this for a long time. Like Google had that book digitization project where they were going to turn all the libraries digital for the good of mankind, but actually we're using it to train AI. And this goes back to the public reason versus the private reason.
Well, again, this was my when my daughter was doing her residency at the Mayo Clinic, and Google was announcing that they are working with the Mayo Clinic to take all of this medical data, and they were going to create medical decision to support systems for Mayo Clinic. And I thought, oh, that's not why they're doing it.
Out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah, that's not why they're doing it. They just want all the data.
Right.
And you're willingly giving it to them. I don't know.
Well, it's a Trojan horse.
I know.
You know, if you don't tell people your real motive, then you can get in the door.
So now we've come all the way full circle back to
that's right.
Real
the
motives
snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, the callback.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, I have to thank you. This has been fascinating. It's been a great conversation. My guest today has been Tim Sylvester, starter of 5 different businesses, starting when he was a kid stealing stuff and then reselling it.
And now stopping people from stealing stuff.
And so he's come full circle morally. He's actually redeeming himself today for what transgressions he had as a high schooler. And so, Tim, thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed it. And best of luck with the business. I hope it goes really, really well for you.
Thank you, Don. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate your having me.
Yeah, thank you.